The Zinthar were not like any species the galaxy had ever seen. Tall, armored, and deadly, they traveled from star to star, conquering worlds and leaving nothing but destruction behind. Their ships filled the skies of countless planets, and their soldiers, fierce and merciless, wiped out entire civilizations. No one had ever stood up to them. Until now, on the peaceful human colony of New Hope, things were different. Located on the edge of the galaxy, the colony was small, quiet, and far from the eyes of the galaxy's larger empires. Humans here lived simple lives, farming, building, and living in harmony with the land. There was no need for armies or weapons. The colony had not seen war in decades, and many of the settlers had never even held a weapon in their hands. The most they feared were the occasional wildlife attacks and the dangers of the vast wilderness that surrounded them. But all of that was about to change. The first signs of trouble came in the form of strange ships appearing in the sky. At first, they were only a handful of dots in the distance, moving silently across the stars. But as the ships grew closer, their shadows stretched across the land, darkening the skies and sending ripples of fear throughout the colony. The colonists had never seen ships like these. They were massive, metallic beasts that looked as if they were forged from the very heart of a dying star, and they were heading straight for New Hope. Captain Alara, the leader of the colony's defense unit, had been preparing for something like this for years. The colony was isolated, and they had long suspected that they might one day face an invasion. Alara had trained herself in a small group of soldiers in the ways of combat, but no one expected this kind of enemy. The Zinthar were a race of conquerors, and they were about to land on their peaceful world. Alara stood on the watchtower, her eyes scanning the horizon. The Zinthar ships had already begun their descent into the colony's atmosphere. The people below were starting to panic, rushing to their homes or hiding in the buildings. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest, but she remained calm. Her training had taught her how to deal with fear, and she would need every ounce of that training now. "We're not ready for this," one of her officers, Lieutenant Kira, said beside her. "We don't have the weapons or the numbers to fight them. They'll wipe us out before we even have a chance." Ilara nodded, but her mind was already working. They couldn't fight the Zinthar in a direct battle. They needed a plan. But what could they do? The Zinthar had ships that could destroy entire cities with a single blast. Their soldiers were stronger, faster, and better equipped than anything the humans had ever seen. Ilara's small force stood no chance against them. "What if we tried to negotiate?" Kira suggested. "Maybe we can offer them something in exchange for our lives." Ilara turned to her officer. "Negotiation might not work with them. The Zinthar don't care about peace. They care about power. And right now, they've come for ours." Kira looked down, worried. "So, what do we do? Wait for them to attack?" "We have to fight," Ilara said firmly, "but not in the way they expect." The Zinthar ships landed on the outskirts of New Hope, their landing gears digging deep into the earth as they touched down. The ground shook beneath them, and dust rose into the air. From the ships, dozens of Zinthar soldiers emerged. They wore thick silver armor that covered their entire bodies, their eyes glowing with a cold, calculating light. These were not the mindless invaders of old stories. These were warriors, trained to conquer and destroy. Commander Varkar, leader of the Zinthar invasion force, stepped down from his ship. His armor gleamed in the pale light of the twin suns, and his posture was confident. He had never failed in battle, and he didn't expect to fail now. The Zinthar had faced countless species and crushed them all. Humanity would be no different. Varkar took a deep breath, the scent of the alien world filling his nostrils. He could feel the power of this place, the strength of the humans who lived here. But it didn't matter. The Zinthar had come to claim it, and they would take what they wanted without mercy. "Prepare the troops," Varkar commanded. "The humans will either surrender, or they will perish. Either way, we will have control of this world." Back at the colony, Ilara's soldiers were scrambling to set up defenses, but they had little time. The Zinthar were already advancing, and soon they would be at the colony gates. Ilara gathered her officers together in the war room. the flickering lights of the monitors casting long shadows on the walls. "Ilara," Kira said, "what do we do now? We can't let them take over. If they do, we're finished. But we can't fight them. We don't have the firepower." Ilara paused, looking at each of her officers. She knew they were all thinking the same thing. They were outmatched. The Zinthar were too powerful. But Ilara had one thing they didn't: a secret weapon. "Everyone, fall back to the base," Ilara ordered. "Prepare the Terran monsters for deployment." There was silence in the room. The officers exchanged looks, unsure of what she meant. "The Terran monsters?" Kira asked slowly. Ilara's face hardened. "It's time. They're the last hope of this colony." The Terran monsters had been hidden away for years. The humans on New Hope had never spoken of them, not even to their closest allies. The project that had created them was a secret that went back to Earth itself, a legacy of a time long forgotten, when humanity had faced its own extinction. In the darkest days of the war against the Zinthar, the Terran government had launched a program to genetically enhance humans, creating soldiers who could stand against the most powerful alien forces in the galaxy. The Terran monsters were the result. Tall, strong, and powerful, these humans were no longer like the ones who had once lived on Earth. They were something new, genetically modified beings who had been enhanced with alien DNA and the latest in military technology. Each of them was a living weapon, capable of incredible feats of strength, speed, and agility. Ilara had always known that she might one day need to use them. She had trained with them, worked alongside them, and understood their power. But now, with the Zinthar landing on their doorstep, it was time to release them. As the soldiers retreated to the base, Ilara activated the codes that would open the doors to the containment chambers. The Terran monsters had been kept in stasis, for years their enhanced bodies dormant and waiting. But now they were about to awaken. One by one, the massive doors opened, revealing the sleeping giants within. Each of the Terran monsters stood over 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in armored exoskeletons, their faces masked behind high-tech helmets. The air hummed with energy as they stirred, slowly rising from their slumber. Ilara stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with determination. "It's time. The Zinthar are here, and they're here to conquer us. But we're going to show them that humans are not so easily defeated. We fight, not just for ourselves, but for everyone who has ever been oppressed by their cruelty. We are not just a colony. We are the last stand." The Terran monsters stood in silence, their eyes glowing beneath their helmets. They understood the mission. They were ready to fight. And when the Zinthar came, they would learn what it meant to face the full might of humanity. The sky above New Hope was darkening, the once peaceful landscape now overshadowed by the immense Zinthar ships. Their metallic forms filled the horizon like monstrous silent giants, casting long shadows over the colony. The hum of their engines could be felt deep in the earth, vibrating through the soil as the ships slowly descended, landing in a perfect line on the outskirts of the colony. The soldiers who had once been preparing for their morning routines now stood frozen, their hearts filled with dread. They had heard the stories, but none of them believed the Zinthar would actually come to this small, unassuming world. Inside the colony's makeshift command center, Captain Ilara stood at the head of the room, her eyes glued to the monitors. She watched the Zinthar troops disembark from their ships, their massive armored figures moving with calculated precision. Ilara knew that the Zinthar didn't waste time with negotiations or surrender. They were here to conquer, to wipe out any resistance, and yet, she had something they had never expected: humanity's ultimate weapon. "The Terran monsters are ready," Ilara said, her voice low but strong. Her officers stood around her, their expressions a mixture of fear and hope. They knew the Terran monsters were powerful, but they had never seen them in action before. For all their training, for all their preparation, this was something different. These were no ordinary soldiers. These were beings of raw strength, enhanced with technology and alien DNA, living weapons created for this very moment. They'll be ready when we need them, Ilara added. She had never been one to back down from a fight, and today would be no different. They've been waiting for this. Lieutenant Kira, who had been with Ilara since the early days of the colony, nodded slowly. She had seen the Terran monsters once, back during the initial training sessions, but it had been brief. There had been no need to bring them out before. Now, it seemed, that day had come. Ilara turned and walked toward a nearby control panel. Prepare the units. Release them. The air in the command center grew tense. The Terran monsters had been kept in stasis for years. In their chambers, they were suspended in a state of suspended animation, their bodies preserved in a form of cryogenic sleep. Ilara had always known that one day the colony might need them. But even the battle had ended quickly, almost too quickly. The once imposing Zinthar forces had crumbled before the might of the Terran monsters. The invaders, confident in their ability to conquer New Hope, had learned the hard way that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Terran monsters towering over the battlefield stood victorious. Their armor, though scarred from the battle, gleamed with an eerie glow in the dimming light. Ilara stood on the command tower, watching the retreating Zinthar ships disappear into the sky. The sound of the last few Zinthar soldiers running in, fear echoed in her mind. She could feel the weight of the victory, but it didn't bring her the joy she had expected. The Zinthar might have been defeated today, but Ilara knew this was only the beginning. They've retreated, Lieutenant Kira said, standing beside her. But they'll be back. This was just the first wave. Ilara nodded, her eyes still fixed on the horizon. The Zinthar were a relentless enemy. She had no doubt that they would regroup and come again, stronger and more determined. We've shown them what we're capable of, Ilara said quietly. But we need to be ready. The Zinthar won't give up so easily. Kira glanced over at the Terran monsters who were now gathering near the edge of the battlefield, their massive forms silhouetted against the setting sun. What do you think they'll do next? I don't know, Ilara replied. But we can't let our guard down. We need to prepare for what comes next. Meanwhile, aboard the Zinthar flagship, Commander Varkar stood before a massive holographic display of the battle. His jaw clenched with frustration as he watched the destruction of his forces. He had led countless successful campaigns, crushing worlds and civilizations with ease. But New Hope had been different. The humans had done something no one had expected. They had turned the tide of the battle with the sheer force of their unexpected power. And now, Varkar was faced with a difficult truth. His forces had been utterly defeated by these so-called Terran monsters. Commander, we've lost contact with most of the remaining forces on the ground, one of his officers reported, his voice filled with disbelief. The Terran monsters wiped them out. Our troops are retreating in disarray. Varkar's face darkened as he clenched his fists. No, this is unacceptable. We cannot let these creatures humiliate us. He turned toward the officer, his eyes burning with fury. Prepare a full report. I want the High Command to know that we were caught off guard. We underestimated the humans, but I swear to you we will not make the same mistake twice. The officer nodded quickly, sensing the anger in his leader's voice. But, Commander, they are unlike anything we've ever encountered. These humans, they are not weak, they are powerful. Varkar's eyes narrowed. Powerful? Do not speak of them as if they are equals. They are mere insects. We will crush them. Back on New Hope, Ilara and her officers gathered in the war room. The monitors in the center of the room showed the battle statistics, highlighting the overwhelming defeat of the Zinthar forces. But Ilara didn't feel a sense of victory. She knew that the Zinthar would be back. The fact that they had retreated so quickly was proof of how dangerous they truly were. The Zinthar didn't give up, and neither would they. We need to reinforce our defenses, Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with resolve. The Zinthar will be back and we need to be ready. We've only managed to push back a small force, Lieutenant Kira pointed out. What happens when they send a larger fleet? We won't stand a chance without more reinforcements. Ilara frowned, her mind working quickly. They had already deployed the Terran monsters, their secret weapon, but that was not enough. The Zinthar would surely send more troops, and their ships were far superior to anything the humans had. "We have one advantage," Ilara said, her voice almost a whisper. "The Zinthar don't know everything about us. They don't know the full extent of the Terran monsters' power. We can use that to our advantage." She turned toward the officers. "Prepare to move the Terran monsters into position again. This time, we'll be more strategic. We'll use the terrain to our advantage." "But Captain," Kira said, "we're still outnumbered. Even if we use the Terran monsters strategically, we don't have enough forces to keep fighting like this. We need more firepower." Ilara shook her head. "We don't have time to wait for reinforcements. We need to strike first." On the Zinthar flagship, Varkar was making his own plans. The defeat had humiliated him, but he was not one to accept failure. The humans, these Terran monsters, had proven to be formidable opponents, but Varkar had a plan, one that would ensure humanity would never threaten the Zinthar again. He had sent a transmission to the High Command, explaining the situation and requesting immediate reinforcements. But that wasn't all. He knew that a direct assault on New Hope would be difficult, especially with the Terran monsters in play. They would need something more. Varkar stood before the holographic display, his mind racing with possibilities. There was one weapon, a last resort that he could deploy, one that could turn the tide of the battle in their favor. "Prepare the Omega fleet," Varkar ordered, his voice cold with determination. "We'll take the humans by surprise, and this time we won't just fight them, we'll wipe them out." The Omega fleet was a Zinthar weapon unlike any other. It was a fleet of ships designed for mass destruction, capable of laying waste to entire planets. The ships were equipped with advanced energy cannons that could tear through the toughest defenses, and Varkar intended to use them to wipe out New Hope once and for all. As the Zinthar prepared their next move, Ilara and her team worked tirelessly to reinforce the colony's defenses. The Terran monsters were deployed once more, but Ilara knew that it wouldn't be enough. The Zinthar were coming back, and they would bring everything they had. "Captain," Kira said, her voice tense, "we've detected something. A massive fleet is approaching, and it's unlike anything we've seen before." Ilara's heart sank as she looked at the radar display. The ships were enormous, far larger than the previous ones, and they were heading straight for New Hope. "Carino, Omega fleet," Ilara whispered. "We need to move, and we need to move fast. The Zinthar are coming with everything they've got." Kira looked at her with wide eyes. "What do we do now?" "We fight," Ilara said, her voice filled with determination. "We fight, or we lose everything." The Zinthar Omega fleet arrived in orbit above New Hope, their massive ships filling the sky like dark shadows. The humans had put up a strong fight, but now it was time for the Zinthar to show their true power. Varkar's voice crackled through the comms as he gave his orders. "Prepare the bombardment. This will be the final strike." The Omega fleet's energy cannons charged, and the ground beneath New Hope began to tremble. Ilara and her team watched as the Zinthar prepared to unleash hell. But even as the first blasts rained down on the colony, Ilara knew one thing for certain. The fight was far from over. The sky above New Hope was darkening as the massive Omega fleet hovered in orbit. The Zinthar ships, each one a giant of destruction, filled the heavens like ominous shadows blocking out the sun. Ilara stood at the command center, her heart pounding in her chest. The ground trembled beneath the force of the Zinthar's energy cannons, and the faint sound of explosions echoed from the distance. The Omega fleet had arrived, and it was unlike anything the humans had ever faced. Ilara watched the monitors as the first blast from the Zinthar ships hit the colony. The shockwave rippled through the air, knocking over buildings and sending plumes of smoke into the sky. Her hands gripped the edges of the table in front of her, and her thoughts raced. The Terran monsters had fought valiantly in the previous battles, but she knew they couldn't hold off an entire fleet, not without help. "Ilara," Kira said, her voice trembling, "we need to do something. We can't just stand here and let them destroy us." Ilara's eyes narrowed, and she took a deep breath. The Zinthar were ruthless, but they didn't know the full power of humanity. The Terran monsters were only a part of the weapon humanity had created. There was something else. Something hidden beneath the surface of the colony that no one had ever seen. "We don't need to just defend," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We need to strike back. We need to show them what we're capable of." Kira looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "We don't have enough firepower to stop the Omega fleet." Ilara turned to face the rest of her officers, each of them looking to her for guidance. "There's one thing the Zinthar don't know," she said. "They don't know what we've been hiding. And now it's time to use it." Deep beneath the surface of New Hope, in the hidden underground facility, the Terran monsters stood ready. The chambers that held them were dark, but their eyes gleamed with an unnatural intensity. They were prepared for battle as they always had been, but what Ilara had never told them, what no one had known except for a few, was that there was more to the Terran monsters than anyone had realized. In the years before the Zinthar invasion, humanity had faced its darkest days. The Terran government, desperate to ensure the survival of the human race, had started a project to not only enhance human strength, but to fuse human biology with extraterrestrial technology. The result was the Terran monsters, a group of genetically enhanced soldiers capable of surviving and thriving in the harshest conditions. But the true power of the Terran monsters lay in something much deeper. The day after the battle, New Hope was quiet. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a soft golden light across the land. The once bustling colony was now a place of reflection. There was victory in the air, but the feeling of triumph was bittersweet. The destruction left behind by the Zinthar's final attack still hung over them like a shadow. The ground was scarred, buildings were reduced to rubble, and the smell of smoke lingered in the air. Ilara stood on the balcony of the command tower, looking out over the scene. The Terran monsters, now resting after their victory, stood silently nearby, their eyes scanning the horizon, ever watchful. They had done what no one thought possible. They had repelled the Zinthar, but it hadn't come without a cost. Many lives had been lost in the battle, both human and alien, and as much as she wanted to feel proud of the victory, there was a lingering worry in Ilara's heart. The Zinthar were relentless. They would come again. "Captain," Kira said softly, stepping up beside her. "The Zinthar fleet has disappeared into deep space, but we both know they won't stay gone forever." Ilara nodded without turning her head. "I know. It's only a matter of time before they regroup. The Omega fleet was just the beginning. They won't stop until they've conquered us. And if we're not careful, they'll return in full force." Kira was silent for a moment before speaking again. "What if we tried to negotiate? I know we've beaten them, but maybe we can use that to our advantage. We've shown them what we're capable of. Maybe we can get them to leave us alone." Ilara turned to face Kira, her expression serious. "The Zinthar don't negotiate. They take what they want, and they destroy everything in their path." "But," Ilara hesitated for a moment, "maybe you're right. We've given them a reason to fear us, and that might be our only chance to save this colony from further destruction." Meanwhile, aboard the Zinthar flagship, Commander Varkar paced angrily in his command center. The defeat had been humiliating. He had watched as his forces were pushed back by the Terran monsters, powerless to stop them. It had been a disaster. His pride, his reputation, everything had been shattered. The humans were not the weaklings the Zinthar had assumed them to be. They had fought back with everything they had, and now Varkar was left to pick up the pieces of his shattered invasion. "Commander," a Zinthar officer said, bowing low before Varkar, "we've received a transmission from the humans. They're requesting a meeting." Varkar's eyes narrowed. "A meeting? What do they want?" "We're not sure, sir, but they've made it clear that they want to speak with you directly." Varkar's first instinct was to dismiss the idea. He had been humiliated. The Zinthar did not beg for mercy, and they certainly didn't meet with those they had conquered. But there was something in the human message that made him pause. They had won the battle, but they didn't seem to want revenge. It was strange, and Varkar was curious. Perhaps they were trying to make a deal. Perhaps they were offering something to avoid further conflict. Very well, Varkar said, his voice cold but calculating. I'll hear what they have to say. The meeting was set for the next day. The Zinthar flagship floated in orbit above New Hope, its massive form casting a long shadow over the planet below. Alara stood at the head of the command center, her officers gathered around her. Kira was beside her looking at the monitors that displayed the live feed of the Zinthar ship. They've agreed to meet, Alara said, her voice steady but filled with caution. But we need to be careful. We don't know what they're really after. We've got the upper hand now, Kira replied, her expression confident. We've beaten them. They should be begging for mercy. Mercy is a luxury we don't have, Alara said quietly. The Zinthar aren't interested in mercy. They're interested in power, and if we show any weakness, they'll take advantage of it. Alara turned toward the Terran monsters, who were standing quietly at the back of the room. They had already proven themselves in battle, but now, the true test was yet to come. Could they hold their ground without resorting to violence? Get ready, Alara said, her voice firm. This is our chance to end this war, but we must be smart. We have to make them believe that we're willing to make a deal, but we can't let our guard down. We're dealing with a ruthless enemy. The Terran monsters nodded, their eyes glowing with silent understanding. They had fought for this moment. But now it was time for humanity to show its strength in a different way. On the Zinthar flagship, Varkar stood before a holographic display, awaiting the arrival of Alara. His thoughts raced as he prepared for the meeting. He had never been in a situation like this before. The Zinthar had never been forced to negotiate with anyone they had conquered. This was uncharted territory for them. The moment the transmission began, Varkar's cold yellow eyes met Alara's, on the screen. Her expression was calm, controlled, but there was a quiet intensity in her gaze. She knew what was at stake, and Varkar knew that if he failed in this meeting, his entire career would be over. Alara, Varkar said, his voice rough with frustration. I didn't expect to be speaking with you again so soon. You've proven yourselves strong. I will give you that. But you've only delayed the inevitable. The Zinthar will return and we will take this world. Ilara's eyes narrowed slightly. You've had your chance, Varkar. You came to New Hope with the intention of destroying it. You've killed many of my people and you've shown no mercy. But we've beaten you. We've proven that we can fight back. So now, we're offering you a chance to leave, peacefully. Varkar scoffed, his lips curling into a sneer. Peace? You think we'll just leave? We don't negotiate with our enemies. The Zinthar take what they want. And we will take your planet. Alara didn't flinch. If you attack us again, we won't be so forgiving. We have weapons you've never seen before. The Terran monsters are just the beginning. We've unlocked an ancient power that you couldn't even begin to understand. Varkar's eyes widened, and for the first time in their conversation, there was a flicker of doubt in his gaze. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you continue this war, you'll lose. We'll fight you until there's nothing left of your fleet. So here's our offer. Leave New Hope. Take your ships and your forces and go back to your empire. You've seen what we can do. We're not a weak species, and we won't stand idly by while you destroy everything we've built. Varkar stood, silent for a long moment, clearly considering Alara's words. His pride told him to reject her offer, to fight until the end. But something in her voice, something in the way she spoke, made him hesitate. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were fighting because they had something worth protecting, and that made them dangerous in a way the Zinthar had never truly understood. I will consider your offer, Varkar said, his voice cold but laced with a hint of respect. But understand this. If we leave, we are not promising peace. We are merely choosing to retreat, for now. Alara nodded. That's all we can ask for. But know this. We won't forget this. If you return, we'll be ready. The transmission ended, and the room fell silent. Alara turned to face her. Officers, her mind racing. The Zinthar had not agreed to leave permanently, but they had shown some hesitation. That was a victory in itself. But the war was far from over. "We've bought ourselves some time," Alara said. "But we can't let our guard down. The Zinthar will return. When they do, we'll be ready." Days passed after the tense meeting with the Zinthar. The colony of New Hope was still recovering from the previous battles, but there was a sense of unease in the air. While the Zinthar had retreated, Commander Varkar's words echoed in Alara's mind. "We will return." He hadn't promised. Peace, only a temporary retreat. Alara knew that time was running out. The Zinthar would come back and they would bring everything they had. Alara stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the monitors. The Terran monsters, those powerful beings that had saved New Hope, were gathered nearby. They had been resting, recovering after their fierce battles, but Alara knew it wouldn't be long before they would be needed again. "Captain, we've detected an unusual fleet movement," Lieutenant Kira said, her voice filled with concern. "The Zinthar are regrouping. We've also noticed that their ships are moving in a different formation, one that suggests they're planning something bigger." Alara's heart sank. She had hoped for more time. The Zinthar had promised to leave, but now they were preparing for another attack. "Get the Terran monsters into position," Alara said, her voice firm, "and prepare our defenses. We don't have much time." Kira nodded, quickly relaying the orders. Alara took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had to make sure they were ready. The Terran monsters were strong, but the Zinthar had learned from their previous defeat. They would come back with even greater force. Alara needed to be prepared for anything. High above New Hope, the Zinthar fleet reassembled. Commander Varkar stood on the bridge of the flagship, his eyes scanning the data on the screen in front of him. He had not underestimated the humans again. They had proven themselves formidable, and now he was going to ensure that nothing would stop the Zinthar from claiming New Hope. The Zinthar ships had been reinforced with new technology, stronger weapons, and larger numbers. Varkar had learned from his previous mistake. This time, they would not give the humans any chance of victory. They would crush them completely. "Commander," one of his officers said, "we're ready to begin the final assault."